Hi, sixth grade. This is section 2 of chapter, what chapter is this? I lost track. 13, I think. 13, yeah. Chapter 13, section 2, on page 369 of your textbook, Central and South American. So we talked about the geography of the Americas, and now we're going on to specific cultures in the Central and South Americans. Connect to what you know. The Americas have a varied natural environment. In this section, you will learn how 4 major civilizations grew in these fertile lands. The Olmec. Essential question. Why are the Olmec thought to be a Mesoamerican mother culture? About 3,200 years ago, a group of people called the Olmec lived along the Gulf Coast of what is now southern Mexico. Theirs was the first major culture to develop in Mesoamerica. Remember, again, Mesoamerica is Central America, between North and South America. So the Olmec came first. They were really the first culture to settle there, that developed there. The Olmec were much like other early civilizations. They began by farming near rivers that often flooded and left rich, fertile soil, so similar to some other cultures we learned about. With a reliable supply of food, some Olmec were free to do other work. Some became potters or weavers, while others became priests or administrators. By 900 BCE, the Olmec had built the great cities now called San Lorenzo and La Venta. These cities were centers of Olmec art and trade. The Olmec had raised mounds and huge stone monuments used for religious ceremonies. Around 500 BCE, the Olmec began to abandon their cities. The reasons for this remain unclear. By 400 BCE, the Olmec civilization had largely disappeared, but Olmec beliefs and ways continued to influence greater Mesoamerican culture for many years to come. All right, so they disappeared. We don't exactly know why. The answer to that is lost to history, unfortunately. Many historians consider the Olmec to be Mesoamerica's mother culture. What's that mean? A mother culture is a way of life that strongly influences later cultures. Olmec art, architecture, religion, and trade helped shape later cultures such as the Aztec and especially the Maya. So you can see a picture of an Olmec stone head there. Those heads were things that the Olmec are specifically known for. There's an old Nickelodeon game show called Legends of the Hidden Temple that is hosted by a stone head like this, and his name is Olmec, and now you know why, in case you ever watch that. Probably like on Nick at Night or something now. The Maya. Key question, how was the Mayan class system structured? The Maya consisted of groups of Mesoamerican peoples who spoke various forms of the Mayan language. Their culture shared many of the artistic and monumental forms of the Olmec. Mayan society develops. Around 1500 BCE, small Mayan agricultural villages began to appear. The Maya lived in highland and lowland areas of what are now Guatemala and Belize, and in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. As with the Olmec, successful farming led to a larger population, the development of cities, and more specialized workers. This division of labor in Mayan society led to the development of a class system. So that you're seeing a lot of, I hope, a lot of connections to a lot of early civilizations we learned about. They sort of all developed in similar ways. This division of labor in Mayan society, I already said this, class system. There are 4 broad social classes in Mayan society. The ruling class, the nobility, you can probably guess what comes next, the peasants, and the slaves. The ruling class was made up of kings and their families. Kings governed each of the Mayan cities. At the height of the Mayan civilization, more than 40 of these cities existed. So it was a great big civilization. Kings also performed the religious duties of priests. So kings and priests were sort of the same thing. In this, you've seen in some ancient civilizations, you have like kings, priests, and they're usually pretty close to each other. In this case, they were the same. Mayan nobles were educated and wealthy and likely worked as scholars, warriors, and merchants. They ate better than peasants. In fact, some foods, such as chocolate, were reserved for the nobility alone. So we don't really see chocolate so much in Europe. Didn't really grow there, but it grew here in the Americas. Peasants, who made up the vast majority of the population, lived very differently from the nobles, clearly. Most were farmers who lived in small villages near the cities. They grew crops such as corn, beans, squash, and chili peppers. Mayan farmers used a variety of techniques to grow their crops. For instance, in the highlands, they increased the land available for farming by building terraces. Terraces again. Slaves were mostly criminals, people captured in war, and orphans. Slaves were owned by all other classes in Mayan society. Okay, so even peasants owned slaves. Mayan cities. During the classical period between CE 250 and 900. So we have an ancient and a classical period in Greece. Same thing in Mayan civilization. Okay, you have an ancient period, and now we're talking the classical period is a little bit later, after the year 0. So between CE 250 and 900, that would be after the year 0, Mayan civilizations reached its peak. The numerous Mayan cities, such as Copan, Tikal, and Palenque, displayed magnificent architecture. Each contained plazas, palaces, and pyramids topped by temples. Many cities also had large stone monuments called steles. On these steles, the Maya carved glyphs that represented important dates and great events. Advances in learning. The Maya developed a complex writing system that used glyphs. They wrote glyphs on paper made from bark. This paper was screen folded to form a book called a codex. Few of these books still exist. There is a picture of Aztec codices. I guess it's the plural of codex. Codices on page 373. Oh, that's really cool. Check that out. Check out the Aztec codices on page 373. Actually, we're going to get there in this chapter, so let's wait. Mayan mathematics were based on the number 20. Our system, by contrast, is based on 10. The Maya were one of the first peoples to use the 0. By using their math system, the Maya made great advances in astronomy. For example, they accurately charted the orbit of the planet Venus. Their knowledge allowed them to produce an accurate calendar system. This system helped the Maya time their planting and harvesting and allowed them to keep precise records. A mysterious downfall. In the 800s, the Maya began to abandon their cities in the southern lowlands. At the same time, their population declined sharply. The reasons for this decline are a mystery. Possible causes include famine that resulted from decades of over-farming or possibly warfare among cities. By the 1400s, the cities in the northern lowlands and highlands had been abandoned too. So that's the end of the Mayas. Very advanced civilization for their time, but declined for mysterious reasons. All right, moving on to the Aztecs. Key question, what brought about the fall of the Aztec Empire? So there's a little bit of a shift here. The Olmecs and the Mayas were ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. The Aztecs and the Incas came much later. Okay, so we're going to see the Aztecs and the Incas actually interacting with Columbian explorers, post-Columbian explorers, really, with the conquistadors. So that's much, much later in history. I just want you to keep that in mind when we're learning about them. This is actually the most recent civilizations that we've learned about so far. The Aztecs. Key question, I already said this, what brought about the fall of the Aztec Empire? The Aztecs were once nomadic hunters and gatherers. They lived in what is now the northwest desert of Mexico. In the late 1200s CE, they began to move south. Eventually, they came upon the Valley of Mexico. All right, so 1200s. It's much later than anything we've learned about before. Settling in the Valley of Mexico. Aztec legends said that they would find their new home where they saw an eagle perched on a cactus. In 1325, they found such a place. It was an island in a large lake. There they built their capital, Tenochtitlan. The lands around Tenochtitlan were swampy or mountainous, not ideal for farming. The Aztecs adapted by constructing chinampas, or raised garden beds, on the lake. With a plentiful food supply, the population of Tenochtitlan grew. At its height, it reached about 250,000 people. This was a very advanced civilization with what they had to work with at the time. Aztec religion and culture. Aztec life was dominated by religion. This religion was based on the worship of agricultural gods. The Aztecs believed in about 1,000 gods. That's a lot of gods. The most important ceremonies were held to ask the gods for a good harvest. The Aztecs produced 2 separate calendars by studying the sun, the stars, and the planets. One calendar was agricultural. It predicted planting and harvesting times. The other was a religious calendar that set times for the many public ceremonies each year. There's your Aztec codices up there. Take time to read that if you'd like. They're pretty cool. Or just books, like books made of bark or deerskin. Pretty cool to see really like ancient books. All right, for the most part, the Aztec writing system did not represent the sounds of spoken language. Okay, instead it used pictures and symbols called glyphs, a little bit like hieroglyphics, to represent words and ideas. The Aztecs produced codices in a written language made up of glyphs. Each codex was filled with colorful pictures detailing everyday life in Aztec society. Historians have learned much about the Aztecs from these records. The empire's rise and fall. This is interesting. Pay attention. By the early 1500s, the Aztec Empire stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. That's a long way. And from the Valley of Mexico to what is now Guatemala. Up to 12 million people lived under Aztec rule. I'm going to say it again. Up to 12 million people lived under Aztec rule. That's a lot of people. From these people, the Aztecs demanded tribute in the form of goods such as corn, gold, and jade. All right, so the Aztecs really ruled a whole empire, and everyone they conquered within their empire owed them tribute, sort of taxes, but rather than money, it was goods. The empire was at its height in 1502 when the Emperor Montezuma II came to power. He angered his subjects by demanding more and more tribute and victims for, here we go, you're waiting for it, and victims for human sacrifice to appease the Aztec gods. Yes, the Aztecs were into human sacrifice. It is a well-established fact. It was grisly. Some subjects began to rebel, weakening the empire's power. They weren't too excited about all the tribute and all the human sacrifice. So they were rebelling. In 1519, the Spaniards, led by Hernan Cortez, arrived in the Aztec Empire. These are the conquistadores, the Europeans coming over from Spain to conquer and conquer the land for Spain. Hoping to avoid war, Montezuma met with Cortez, but the Spaniards took him prisoner and he was later killed in battle. Soon, diseases brought by the invaders weakened the Aztecs. Helped by thousands of rebels, the Spanish used their superior weapons to conquer Tenochtitlan in 1521 and put an end to the Aztec Empire. So in one small paragraph, you learn something really cool and really important, and I encourage you to Google it and I can maybe find a video for you. There's some really interesting stuff when Hernan Cortez came and conquered the Aztecs, and it was nuts. Like, basically the Aztecs had never seen guns, they'd never seen horses, and when the Spaniards came in with them, they were like, okay, well, we better make a treaty with you. Didn't work out, not to mention disease came in and wiped out a lot of the Aztecs, and Montezuma, in the meantime, was dealing with a bunch of rebellion from his own people. So basically, the Spanish came in and slaughtered and completely destroyed this entire culture. But they claimed the land for Spain, and now that is why that area of the world speaks Spanish. The Inca. Key question, how did the Inca build an empire in the Andes? The Inca learned to live in the high and rugged terrain of the Andes Mountains in what is now Peru. So the Inca were contemporaries of the Aztecs. They lived around the same time, but they, rather than being in Mesoamerica and Mexico area, they were down in South America, okay? Their capital city, Cusco, is in a valley in the Andes more than 11,000 feet above sea level, okay? So they lived high up. From Cusco, the Inca eventually built up the largest empire in the Americas. So the Incas were actually larger in empire than the Aztecs. So we already learned that the Aztecs controlled a huge empire. The Incas controlled an even huger one. They were also slaughtered by the Spanish. Spoilers, but that's going to happen. All right. Pachacuti founds an empire. By the early 1400s, the Inca had expanded their rule over nearby peoples. In 1438, the 9th Inca ruler, Pachacuti, came to power. Under his rule, the Inca conquered all of Peru and more. By 1500, the Incan Empire had grown further, extending 2,500 miles along the west coast of South America. About 12 million people lived in the empire. A lot of people. Daily life in the empire. The geography of the Andes made life challenging for the peoples of the empire. The steep land made farming difficult. Farmers cut terraces into the sides of mountains, terraces again, to get the most out of their land. They grew crops such as potatoes and corn, and raised animals such as alpacas and llamas. These animals provided wool and sometimes meat. Communication, like farming, was difficult. The Inca kept up a system of roads by requiring a certain amount of labor per subject each year. At least 14,000 miles of roads crisscrossed the empire. So this is different from the Aztecs, but the Incas really set up a huge highway and road system. It was a big deal at the time. On these roads, runners called chasquis carried messages the length of the empire. Troops and trade also moved efficiently. All right, so because of these roads, they were able to communicate and move things along the empire pretty efficiently. And the Inca fall to the Spanish. Again, Other Andean peoples could not defeat the Inca. Their army was 200,000 strong, well-trained, and well-equipped. However, the Incan Empire was weakened by unrest, much like the Aztec Empire. In a bitter civil war that began in 1527, a leader named Atahualpa defeated his brother. The war was just ending when Francisco Pizarro arrived on the South American coast in 1532. Francisco Pizarro, another conquistador from Spain. Like the Aztecs, the Inca were no match for the Spanish, who rode horses, wore metal armor, and carried steel weapons. The Spanish also carried new diseases that were especially deadly to the Inca. So we're all unfortunately too aware of the damage that a new disease can do to a society. They have no immunity to this, and it just came in and just wiped them out. They had more than one disease that wiped them all out, that they'd never heard of before, had no immunity to. Pizarro met with Atahualpa, took him prisoner, and later had him executed. After Atahualpa's death, the Incan Empire crumbled. The Spaniards moved on to Cuzco, while conquering peoples rose in rebellion against their Incan masters. By 1535, the Spanish controlled most of the Incan lands. Eventually, millions of Inca died of European diseases. The last Inca ruler was defeated in 1572, and the Incan Empire ceased to exist. All right, that was kind of long, but I think it was interesting. I hope you do too. Please answer the questions in the Section 2 assessment. Again, you do not have to do the graphic organizer. You can just answer the question, how did the end of the Maya civilization differ from the ends of the Aztec and Incan empires? You should probably just know that from, if you were listening, that's a pretty easy question, I think. So please answer those questions. You don't have to do the activity. And I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.